Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining the Economic Development Group. We are, so my name is Jackie Jellin. I'm the Director of the Planning Department, and with me I have Ann Christelius, who is one of our planners here in the planning office. And so between the two of us, we're hoping to have a productive discussion tonight regarding economic development as it pertains to the County Development Ordinance, or the CDO. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just want to go over how we want to have the setup go on for today. So first things first, we want this to be an interactive focus group. So we want to talk about how we're wanting you to communicate with us through this webinar version. So we do want to hear from you, and all of these meetings are recorded. So we understand that there are 3 meetings happening concurrently. We will be posting those recordings after today's meeting on our monroecdo.com website. So please don't feel like you're going to miss out on anything. The conversations for each group will be recorded and posted, and we hope to continue the conversations after this focus group meeting with each of you. So the purpose of the slide presentations that we posted and sent out before tonight's meeting is just so that you would be able to pick the correct Zoom room and maybe help think about the content in a different way, maybe a larger scale way than just like a granular perspective or a property specific perspective. We can still answer questions outside of this Zoom about specific properties. We're going to try and tailor the questions tonight to keep everyone focused and maybe on the same page, because there is a lot of content to go through with the CDO, and we understand that. So we're hoping to kind of have the conversations be geared towards a way that everyone can participate. So the way that we want you to be able to indicate that you would like to communicate with us is to use the controls on the Zoom screen. So there's the raise hand function, there's questions, Q&A, or chat functions through the webinar. And then also we have our planning office email address that is also used if you'd like to start a larger discussion, possibly even discuss after the focus group, and we'll be able to check that and continue the conversations after tonight. So just because we can join Zoom from a variety of different ways these days, I want to remind you where the controls are so that you're able to hear us, you're able to join us. So the yellow box is indicating the Q&A function. Not as widely used as the red box, the chat, but you can use the Q&A function, and we'll try and go ahead and answer those questions and answers in that box. The chat function is a little more popular and probably our preference. We'll try to, Ann's going to be moderating for me and helping me see when you have questions throughout the presentation or even after. And we'll try to answer those in real time. And then of course, the blue box is the raise hand function, so that you'll be able to indicate that you want to be unmuted, and we'll go ahead and let you do that so that you can ask any questions. Here are the controls from a cell phone. So they are towards the bottom here. And then make sure that your audio is on in the top. So the green, just make sure that you can see the volume button on. And then lastly, from an iPad, it's in the top right-hand corner. So just make sure you've joined an audio, and also, you know where the functionality is. Okay, so enough housekeeping. I want to go through an outline for today's presentation. So the goal of this group is that we're going to try and understand some of the changes happening to the draft zoning map. So we do want to keep coming back to the Module 2 draft zoning map, draft use table. And so we're going to look at a big picture view of some of the changes that'll be happening in the zoning map, and then go into some of the focus areas for today. So we're going to look at specific zone groups or specific areas that we've noticed that there's changes between the draft and what is currently zoned. And then we do have some questions for the group that we want to ask you at the end that are a little bit more targeted. But again, if you have questions throughout the meeting, please feel free to indicate those to us. Okay, so I'm just going to start out with a little bit of background information. just wanted to let everyone know, so the last entire update to our county development ordinance was in 1997. Since then, we've had a number of piecemeal edits. So this county development ordinance is really a good chance for us to take all of the things that we've been learning over those years, things that have been changing, updated comprehensive plans, and integrate that into the best plan possible for the community. We're also trying to limit the number of zoning districts that we have. So we have over 45 districts and over 100 PUDs. And we're wanting to make this a more manageable number, such as 16, which is what we have proposed currently. We're hoping that that will make it easier for everyone to use and get rid of some of the duplication that we currently see in the zoning ordinance around the county and make it a little bit clearer. And then also the goal will be to reduce down the number of uses, possibly consolidating those uses, adding new uses to bring us up to today's current times with some of the demand that we see. So we'll be reducing that from 372 to 174, but we're not intending on really getting rid of any of the old uses. We're more so consolidating those uses into different ones that make sense to group together. So we're going to be focusing tonight mostly on the zoning map. So I just want to point that out. We do have other sessions and other discussions that we will want to have about these other items, but for tonight, we want to focus on the zoning map. So I do want to bring up that the zoning districts that we have currently on the left-hand side are primarily being consolidated into different groups. So like I said, we're going from about 45 zones to 16 zones. And there is some methodology that I'll get into about how we determined how certain zones should be consolidated into others, or whether we took into account just strictly the consolidation, or if we looked at other information more specifically. So as you can see for this example here, we're pointing out that there are 3 zones currently under our current zoning map. So general commercial in the areas intended for annexation, and then the general business zone, which are all going to be consolidated into one zoning district called general business. So that's how you would use this conversion chart if you were looking at possibly the current zoning map and understanding, oh, did this just become consolidated, or is this changing in terms of like going from business to residential, or is it simply being just consolidated into a more clear zoning district? So I want to go through just a little bit of the methodology for the zoning map changes, since we do receive this question quite a bit. So we are trying to consolidate the number of zones first and foremost. So that's why a lot of people will say, you know, my zoning district's going away. Well, it's in character, it may not be going away. It may just be combining with another zoning district that's very similar in terms of its lot size, or in terms of its character, in terms of its, you know, location, things like that, that we could see it being similar in terms of allowing uses or development that will look fairly similar to another area of the county. So in doing so, we reviewed the comprehensive plan. We have several comprehensive plans for the area, for the county. There's a 2012 comprehensive plan that's the most expansive for the entire county, but we also have the urbanizing area plans for those areas immediately around the city of Bloomington. And then we've also reviewed some of the environmental constraints. So if the property is fully within, let's say, the floodplain, that's going to significantly constrain its ability to be developed. So we wouldn't want to zone something the highest intensity industrial district and it be completely within the floodway, because that's not something that would be clear to the person who would be buying it based on the zoning. They may not notice that it's completely within the floodway. It also does constrain the type of activity they can do on the property, so it further limits it. So we do want to be cognizant of some of the environmental constraints, but note that even if your property is zoned a certain way, the environmental constraints still do apply. So it's just something that we took into additional consideration if it was especially restrictive of certain areas. And then we also want to consider the current build out of properties as well as the current uses and the current zoning. So if we've zoned something business for the last 20 years, but there's been a residence there for 20 years, we can make that decision at this time to say, well, the comprehensive plan is saying it may be a rural area. Maybe it is not best used for business. It could be better used as a residential area given its location and proximity to other services. Okay, so in the draft zoning ordinance, we have a header on the use table. That header on the use table does break out the individual 16 proposed zones into what we're calling zone groups. So for instance, Ag 2.5, FR5, CR 2.5, and RC1 are 4 zoning designations within the draft zoning map. We have coupled this with something called a zone group, which is just indicating that these 4 zones tend to be our rural zones. So when we look at a table later on, you're going to see these further consolidated and just saying something like rural. That is indicative of these 4 zoning districts combined. We're only doing that just to be able to talk about some of the changes that we're showing. We still want you to pay attention to the individual zoning designations because that's how you're going to find the different uses that are permitted. But we do that throughout. So the yellow is residential, the blue is institutional, which is only 1 zone. Business are the 2 zones, limited business, general business. Industrial, you have mineral extraction, heavy industrial, light industrial, and then airport is its own zone and own zone group. So zone groups and then zoning designations. We're going to focus on zone groups for the time being, and then we'll also get into zoning designations. Okay. One of the questions that we have received is what's changing? So going back to our zone groups, we're looking at the different categories: rural, residential, institutional, business, industrial, and airport. We've consolidated the current zoning that we have also into those groups based on that conversion chart that I showed you. So we've tried to compare apples to apples in showing what's changing in the airport district across the way. So it's important to pay attention to the acreage here. Sometimes the percent change or the changes on the right-hand side may seem fairly drastic, but understand that we're talking about a large magnitude of scale when we're talking about acreage in the county. We have quite a bit of land that we're administering jurisdiction over. So the business district, for instance, in the current zoning has 911 acres approximately, and is proposed to have 801 acres of business approximately. Industrial is going from 8,669 to 8,590. So this continues on as you go through. I'm going to go through 2 of the bigger changes that we're seeing in the draft, which is going to be the business and then also the residential and rural. Those are going to be our 2 examples for today. Okay, so we'll start with the residential and the rural. So as you can see, residential is changing in acreage. It seems to be going down quite a bit. And then rural appears to be going up quite a bit. So we're going to take a look at some of those changes that we were able to visualize in a new tool that we're going to be using tonight, and point out maybe a few reasons why that is. Okay, so I understand this link here. I was informed that this is not public. So this is something our GIS team put together, and we apologize it's not yet public. We want to see how it's useful for each of you. We don't want to add this as an additional confusion because we understand we have a lot of maps out there. And we do want you to focus on the draft zoning map, which is different than this slider map. It's just going to be a tool that we're going to propose tonight just to kind of see where there are changes. And then we can take that to the draft zoning map and look at those a little bit closer, which I have done in the next slide. But I will pull over this slider tool. So what our GIS team has put together for us is on the left-hand side is the current zoning groups. And on the right side are the proposed zoning groups. So we've made all of the colors on both sides of the screen based on their zone group, the same color, which I think is part of some people's discussion or trouble with using the proposed zoning map is that we are changing the color for very like districts. So like Ag RR to Ag 2.5 essentially is the same, but we are changing the color under the proposed zoning. So we want to make it a little bit clearer by keeping the color the same. So in our first example of residential and rural, we will pay attention to the left-hand side is the current zoning and the right-hand side is the proposed. So the yellow color is residential and the green color is rural. So we can see if you slide back and forth, what is changing. So as I go to the left, this is the proposed on the right. So for instance, one of the areas we're going to focus on is right here, which you can see is changing from residential to rural. But overall, like I mentioned before, because of the amount of area that's in the county, there's really not a ton of changes being shown on the map. So you will have to get a lot more granular to look at some of these changes. And it also is not showing you, for instance, changes from light industrial to heavy industrial or limited business to general business. This is just indicating business because we're doing this by group. So again, this is just one of the tools that we can put together for the public to utilize to see some of those larger scale changes, but you lose some of that granular change that will be important as we get closer to the point of adoption. And we still want you to focus on that larger scale map. So I can come back to this at any time, but I just wanted to show you this is one of the tools that we've put together to show some of the changes. And like I said, I've screenshot those changes in the PowerPoint so that you can see them on the proposed draft zoning map instead of this map. And I'll pause here for a second and I'll see that there's a few things in the chat. Is there anything I need to clarify or answer at this point, or should I keep proceeding?
I think you're fine to keep going forward. I responded to a message from Peter in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so like I mentioned in that slider, you could see that the area was going from residential to rural. Now, just to clarify, our rural areas still allow for residential use. So for instance, right now in our current zoning, this area in green would be classified as residential, and this area in the darker green would be classified as rural. Both would allow, for instance, a single family use or possibly a 2-family use, but this lighter green is a 1 acre lot size, and the darker green is a 2.5 acre lot size. The darker green is also going to accommodate a lot more agricultural uses because it's known as the Ag RR district, whereas the estate residential, you may see a little bit more of those estate lots, single family lots, things like that. So this is an area of focus that's changing. So proposed, that's going to be closer to the Ag RR, the Ag 2.5. So this area here is staying 1 acre. This is going to be suburban residential, but the majority of this area here was proposed to become more of the Ag district. And there are some other zones in here. Like I said, this is a 1 acre lot size here, suburban residential, possibly covering existing residential. One of the reasons that we have outlined this area to become a bit more rural is because of the extent of the environmental constraint here. And so because of the floodway and the existence of some of the farmland in this area, well, we have proposed it to become more of the ag 2.5 is what it's proposed to be zoned as. So that's an example of a relatively large piece of land in the county that would be changing that from, say, residential to rural. So that's one of the reasons that number is changing. And we look at the comprehensive plan for this area, and it really does say farm and forest should be closer to this area. So we're trying to match up with what the comprehensive plan is saying, also looking at some of the environmental constraints, and also looking at what's currently what's there now. And there is some farmland in this region that we believe would be best covered by Ag 2.5. So going through a little bit of the methodology, as well as just noting how I use that slider bar to indicate areas of change. Okay, so another example that I'll go through is business. This is a relatively small acreage change as it relates to the entire mass of the county. As you know, we have several hundreds of thousands of acres here. So when thinking about change in 100 acres, that is relatively small, but yet we still want to be cognizant of where those changes are occurring, or if there's other places where it's more suitable to add those acreages back in, other than the places that we're taking it out. We would like to hear from you on those types of topics. So an area where we ended up seeing a change in the business district, and I'll pull over that slider map over here so you can see that. So you're going to be paying attention to this red color. That's the business color. We noticed some of the changes were occurring closer to the lake. We didn't see too much change in the way of the west side or even towards Ellettsville. Again, the left side is the current zoning and the right side is the proposed. So we didn't see too much change in the way of the red happening in other places. So we ended up focusing in on some of these places near Lake Monroe to go over why that is changing. So looking at the area south of the lake in particular, we do have a zoning designation currently that's called pre-existing business. And that is a zoning designation that went into place in our 1997 ordinance to cover businesses that weren't necessarily in the use table or easily identified during the zoning map update. And what they said was these businesses can continue, and they can expand, but they can't become more intense. So we're going to be transitioning that pre-existing business zone into a different zoning designation that offers a little bit more predictability and flexibility. And then we also looked at a few of these and noticed that they were utilized as residential and they were not being utilized as business. And so actually when a residence is zoned pre-existing business, they're not able to expand. So we've had several rezones in the past little while about near Lake Monroe with people that want to rezone out of pre-existing business into residential. So we're trying to be cognizant of that, and also noticing, this is in a constrained area environmentally. This is not really close to a lot of other services. So we take that into account as well. So yeah, just to reiterate, we're eliminating the pre-existing business zoning district, putting those either into limited business, general business, or another zoning district. Lake Monroe, we had some that were historically business, but used residentially. And I also note that we're having a new zoning district proposed, which is the Rural Community 1 zoning district, which will be in our designated communities. So Steinsville, Harrodsburg, Smithville. Each of those communities will have this Rural Community 1 district. And that's going to give some flexibility because it's going to allow either residential or commercial on certain zone lots. So even though it's classified as a residential zone group, rural community, there is going to be that subset that's able to be used somewhat light commercial or limited business in those rural communities if they choose to go that route. I wanted to point that out. Okay, so I have some questions for you all, and I'm hoping that we can have a good discussion regarding some of the information I just presented. So if for anyone that is on the call that would like to answer any of these questions, please continue to utilize the chat or raise your hand, and we can go ahead and start. So my first question for you is, do you see a demand for residential near employment areas? And Anne, if you can check the chat or raised hand, and we'll go ahead and start unmuting people. Okay. Looks like we have one person with their hand raised. Could you go ahead and unmute Sharon?
Testing 1, 2, 3. Am I?
Yes, we can
awesome.
hear you.
I guess I'm just saying what others are saying in chat, which is that yes, we're crying out for more residential, particularly something that would allow people like working people that like work in Bloomington to live frugally and densely, and perhaps ideally sans owning cars. You know, it's like maybe $300 or $400 a month that's being siphoned. I'm a new professor at IU, and the grad students and various community members. You know, it's really a very tense, sad situation to see. You know, poor people in trailer parks or something paying $1,300 in rent. You know, each day, like a company store, you work a day and you're a day deeper in debt just for a lack of the zoning that would allow dense housing. So, you know, yeah, that'd be awesome. And also the thing that you mentioned about rural community zoning that lets people do a little light business, maybe in their homes, also seems like a really wonderful thing that can give people, you know, entrepreneurial options and like sort of reduce barriers to entry to various kinds of little businesses that people might set up, which is, you know, yeah, seemed very delightful. But yeah, answer the main question: more residential, please, and not giant lots, but ways that frugal people can be frugal together and have lovely communities.
Thank you, Sharon. And just to specify, you know, since we are talking about a county context, I do like to ask the question, and there's no wrong answer. You mentioned dense housing. What, you know, what kind of look or what number of units would you clarify as your definition of dense housing that would be fitting maybe in a county context?
All right. I mean, so it's just to represent like the people that I've talked to that like just feel so strongly about this, and you know, it would really just improve their lives so much. Like, you know, like, I mean, there are grad students that are paid like $25K like a year, like really, you know, they would just like the most efficient way that they could live. They would love to, you know, students would love to graduate with less debt. You might say, why are we looking outside of the town? You know, why are we looking outside of Bloomington for this? Well, you know, we all know that no one necessarily likes to have like a big dense lot of students or you know, workers, poorer people like moving into their neighborhood, right? So, I mean, they would be perfectly happy to live densely within city limits, but like that doesn't seem to be feasible. I had an interesting long conversation with someone about zoning in the planning department for the city, and he was pretty much like, yeah, you'd be competing with, you know, a zillion, you know, we're offering some like private money towards this, and he was like, you'd be shocked if you could find a place where you could put together a frugal apartment or an apartment. You'll be competing with everyone else that's trying to build luxury apartments in town. So yeah, anything that you guys could do to break the like strangling, like, you know,
A
well, the
bottleneck.
supply demand curve being
Yeah.
at the point it's like sucking out regressively, sucking out $300 a month from poor people to landlords now would be amazing. Yeah,
Okay.
duplex or single lot size would be cool too.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. Thank you, Sharon.
Jackie, we have quite a few comments in the chat.
Okay,
And we also have Randy Cassidy has his hand raised, and also Jay Lizelle.
okay. Let's start with the people with their hands raised, and then if any of the questions in the chat, we can read those out loud. Maybe you can spend some time seeing like which ones, categorizing some as comments, some as questions, and then we'll start with the people with their hand raised.
Okay, so next up would be Randy Cassidy.
Okay, we'll go ahead and unmute Randy.
Hey, perfect. Hello. Can you hear?
Randy? Yep,
Yeah,
we can hear you.
Good evening, Jackie. Good evening. Okay, quick question in regards to when we're talking about the business zoning and where we're dropping out 109 acres and we're talking residential near our business. When we look at that, is that a reflection of the business areas we're talking about? Is a significant amount of that near the I-69 and near the ability to have the infrastructures we need to increase our density? Or where is it clustered? I obviously haven't been able to see the complete map, so.
Sure. So some of the areas that we focused on the changes to the
When
business.
we're dealing with the.
Sorry. Cutting out a little bit. Sorry about that. The changes to the business we focused on south of the lake. I think there's still opportunity to propose business in the I-69 corridor, especially to the north. And that's something that the Plan Commission has been talking about, but isn't currently supported by the comprehensive plan. So that's something that I think is a good point to bring up as something that we could reconsider.
The question I have in respect to it is the density that would be required to have our 15-minute walkable city and be able to put people close to their workplace. Also has to have the utilities accordingly and be able to provide the infrastructure. And is that something that we're looking at to see business, pre-existing zoned business and infrastructure so we can attract and retain the current and future employers and also be able to attract the closer, higher density housing, which from a density standpoint, I think on what the MRU or medium density residential, the current plan has a 0.21 density to it. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, so MR is a 0.21 acre density. And to go back to your first point, that is a consideration of the methodology. So we do have the sewer and water lines when we're considering what to zone properties as. As many of you may know, there's been some restrictions to that sewer expansion in certain areas for residential uses specifically. But we are still going to be asking that certain density of housing is connected to sewer and not just a septic system. So it will be a pinch point for certain density demand in areas, and they will need to have sewer. So that's a good point.
And then the last question I have in regards to it is this a situation where we're looking at on our comp plan and such that we're also looking at it from a community standpoint of being able to help provide the infrastructure so that we can keep that land cost and infrastructure cost off the cost of the residents themselves as we see the development occur. That way we can keep the businesses, the homes close and still have the infrastructure and keep that affordability because, as we are right now, I think as the previous individual said, we have an issue with affordability in our community. And a lot of that has to do with the plans, the zones, and what the costs are to get to actually building the residence.
Yeah, so things that we can do to keep costs down. We, in the zoning ordinance, are not going to be able to necessarily address some of the subsidy questions or grant questions that you have, but we will be able to say, not require stringent architectural standards if people do not want to see those increase the cost. We can also make the criteria for applying a little straightforward and maybe less time consuming for people. So and being clear about by right development versus development that is, say, conditional or requires plan commission review. So those are all the things that we can do to try and keep costs in the forefront. So those were good questions. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Okay. So it looks like Jay Lozelle is the next person.
Yes, hello.
Hi there. We can hear you.
Hello. Yeah, gentleman before brought up a good point there. That's what my concern was, is what kind of cost on, I think it's a good deal for people because people like to live closer to work and everything, but what kind of cost on all this is going to pass off to the customers, the residents that are going to move in these places, like structural wise, and I mean, the utilities and everything.
Yeah, so when there's a development that goes in and the person has to put in a certain level of infrastructure like side paths, sidewalks, street trees, obviously sewer, water, all of those costs get put back into the cost of owning the property. So we can also control things like lot sizes and density of housing that's permitted to go in. So each one of those things factor into the math of buying a property. So those are things that, if you have comments on tonight for the zoning ordinance in specific areas, if you think, say, residential near employment areas, you should be able to do, maybe apartments, or if you're thinking more like duplexes, those are questions or answers that we would like to hear from the public.
Yeah, I was just wondering what kind of lot size are you going to require for this? What was your plan or kind of on it?
Yeah, so each of the different zoning designations have a different lot size. Right now in the zoning ordinance currently, we have lot sizes as small as 0.07 acres. That's about, I think, 5,000 or 6,000 square feet. And that goes all the way up to 5 acres, depending on where you live. But the 5 acres and the 2.5 acres are some of the more rural areas. Ideally, for these areas that were residential near employment, we're assuming that they would be closer to infrastructure, utilities. So those lot sizes would probably be smaller than that.
Okay.
Okay.
Next up, we have Jen Pearl with her hand raised.
Hi, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. First of all, thank you to the planning department and all of the work that you're putting into this. There were a couple comments I wanted to make. Someone in the chat mentioned concerns around moving to larger rural lot sizes is actually going to be cost prohibitive for the type of housing that's needed in our community. As of 2022, the median home sales price was $295,000, according to the Bloomington Board of Realtors. And we have an ongoing housing shortage of all types across the community. Knowing that 50% of the workforce for our largest employers is actually coming from outside of Monroe County, and our average wages in the private sector is about $24 to $25 an hour. It can be very cost prohibitive for people to live in the community. So we would have concerns around reducing acreage for building houses, as well as anything that would drive up the costs. I also dropped some additional statistics on commuting patterns into the chat. We should also consider employees that are living here and commuting outside of Monroe County for work. About 30% of the NSWC Crane workforce, which is about 5,000 to 6,000 people, lives inside of Monroe County. So the considerations are, the cost burden for travel for workers, the cost of housing, the cost to our existing employers as they're trying to go further and further afield to find employees, and then the loss of income tax to Monroe County for people who have to move outside of Monroe County. So those are all considerations we'd like to put forth. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, up next we have Tamby Winkle Cassidy.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, this is Tammy. I just have a couple of questions. I'll ask them individually after you answer, and then I'll ask the second if necessary. The first question is, it's about commercial property, more like the LB and GB. So I have noticed that if I go to the city and I'm looking at to lease or purchase a property, I can go into the office there and ask them what uses, and they can tell me, can I have this particular use? And I've done that on a couple of occasions. But in the county, if there's a business there and that business moves out and then another business moves in, even though the two businesses may be different, they may both be on the limited business or the general business list. Why do I have to go through so many ordinance hoops to go ahead and open a business that's already on the use list for that property?
And are you talking about site plan requirements, or are you talking about just knowing the list of uses that are permitted?
I'm talking about site plan requirements and other requirements that seemingly would already be in place, knowing a business already existed that was on the use list. But then if I go in to use it for something else, you're told that, you may have to do a development plan or a survey where there's already been an existing business. So
Right.
I think that prohibits business, many times small business in the county. And that's an ordinance that we could look to for change. If there is a property that already is zoned for GB and GB has that list of uses, then someone should be able to move their business in there and go ahead and take over either by lease or by ownership.
I see. Yeah. So I think what you may be discussing, Tammy, is part of the requirements for, say, filing a new site plan. So let's say you're changing the use from retail sales to warehousing and distribution. If that change of use requires a change in the landscaping between the neighbors and the use because of its intensity, then it does require a site plan requirement to plant more trees or what have you. Additionally, if you're moving from, let's say the other way around, warehousing and distribution to more of a retail where you're going to have more customers and you're changing your parking by more than a certain percent, it also does trigger a re-review of the parking minimum. So some of the other discussions that are going on tonight, as in relation to, do we still need to have parking minimums for each of the uses? Can we relook at that? What are some of the triggers that certain uses can just exchange for other uses and we do not need a site plan? So those are good questions. And
thank you. And that is my point exactly, in
Yes.
that, a uses list should be indicative of your ability to just move in or buy that property with that list of uses and be able to use it for that. So thank you for
Okay.
that. And I think that's my only question for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, we have Margaret Clements.
Can you hear us, Margaret? I think you're on mute.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
Well, I'd like to thank you for sharing with us some of the changes that you're working on and to thank you for relating those to us today. There are a couple of items that I'd like to clarify, and that is number one, the county is more rural and the people in the county would like to keep the county rural, to keep the rural aspects, the rural character of the county intact. Number two, a lot of development has gone on, and a lot of the housing projects that have been approved in the past have not yet been built out. But according to my calculations, in the last 3 years, there are over 6,500 units that have been approved and that are being built, under construction now, will be under construction soon, or will have not yet broke ground, but that they will do so very soon. So a lot of housing. And in fact, according to my calculations, it exceeds the anticipated need for housing. So I'd like to make sure that we are growing in a sustainable way, and to make sure that some of our precious resources, like land for small farms, small agricultural initiatives, that those are preserved, that those opportunities are preserved. And then lastly, I'd like to make sure that we don't conflate supply with affordability, because that just doesn't seem to have happened in different projects that have been approved throughout the county, where we were convinced to make paired patio townhomes in order to create extra dense space under the idea that that housing would be affordable. Well, they're being built and they're, the asking price is $499,000, not including homeowners association fees. And so the market is difficult, especially with mortgage interest rates going up. And I don't know how much of that is within our control or within our purview as planners to resolve, especially when we have real estate investment companies coming in and buying up a lot of the single family homes that currently exist. So I think that it's important to be aware of broader market forces on our community, a lot of Airbnb, a lot of VRBO, a lot of taking offline single family homes in the city that used to be available for families. So these are a lot of pressures that are affecting Bloomington and have a lot to do with the way we attract employment, the type of jobs we're able to attract, and the type of pay we're able to pay the employees as to whether or not they can actually afford the housing that they need in order to be comfortable. So I just wanted to put that out there and say that we've built a lot is coming online, a lot hasn't yet broken ground, but boy, we've really, really radically increased the inventory. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. And then Ann, did we want to move on to some of the chat discussions at this point to see if, before I move on to the next set of questions?
So far, most of this conversation in the chat they're everybody's speaking together and speaking to each other. We do see kind of repeatedly talking the theme of talking about residential near employment zones, and we've had some conversation by the BEDC members. Mr. Randy Cassidy did have a question at the very beginning where they asked if Clear Creek would be considered a rural community or not.
Okay, yep. I think that I have spoken to Mr. Cassidy in the past about that, and that's something that we could be under consideration for. And it's not something that we currently have because I don't think there was ever a rural community plan for the Clear Creek area. And that's what we based some of those zoning designations off of. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't take another look at that. So I think that that is something that's ongoing discussion. Okay, great. So are we ready to move on? I think to the next slide is relating back to business. So since we focused a little bit on the residential, rural, and then also the business side of things, the next set of questions are, what are the types of businesses that are in high demand in the county from those of you that are talking with the business community? What are the barriers for new businesses to locate in the county? I think we had one person, Tamby, mentioned some of the barriers in terms of site planning or cost to switch out for other businesses. So if there's any other comments on that point. And then are there areas of the county that you hear people wanting to develop, but maybe there's difficulty or issues in being able to do so? So I'll go ahead and just start over with people's hands lowered. So if anyone has a comment they want to make, you want to raise your hand in this regard or put something in the chat, we'll do it all again. So thank you. This has been really helpful so far. Give people a minute or so to. Okay, it looks like we have one person with their hand raised, so we could go ahead and start with Tamby again.
Yeah, so I have a question. I don't know if you recall, I think recently there might have been one of our areas, I think it might have been Steinsville, where a group of people came together and talked about redevelopment for their area and got a zoning change. Is that something that we could look more to do for redevelopment? Because I think redevelopment of a lot of these areas is key to helping us keep the county, if that makes sense. I think that we could be a little more helpful with respect to some of the expectations for redeveloping some of these small areas. So Jackie, does that ring a bell to you at all? And if it does, can you reflect a little bit on it?
Yeah, so actually the group in Steinsville were rezoning from general business to residential. We had originally zoned a bunch of parcels along Main Street in Steinsville business, even though there were existing residential. So they decided collectively as a community, they got consent letters and had a lot of people from that area show up. They decided that they would like to be rezoned residential. So in a case where you do have a lot of people that are kind of organizing around a certain vision or a certain use for an area, and you want to have them present together or show certain opinions about certain areas, we still do have that CDO feedback survey on our website. We're also going to be talking with the Plan Commission about an opportunity for people to bring forward some of their comments for their satisfaction with the zoning district. So I think there's going to be more to come about how people can maybe express those changes that they want to see in a certain venue, maybe even speak to the Plan Commission. So we're still trying to work that out a little bit. But I do think it would be helpful to have multiple voices to discuss what the interests are for those parcels. In particular, the owners of those parcels is also helpful to have their voice heard.
Okay, and then what is happening with the feedback that you provide? If like I provided feedback in the CDO website, where does that go?
Yeah, so I can talk with you a little bit offline, Tammy. We did try to, we're going to see about taking that on the road, possibly with others in regards to reviewing that by township. We're not yet there with the total organization of how that's going to logistically look. But we are planning on sort of reviewing those CDO feedback surveys by area and consolidating a bunch of information regarding, those individual parcels, current zoning, proposed zoning, lot size, what the vote was in terms of dissatisfaction all the way up to satisfaction. So we were able to draft something, but I think we're still in the works about how we're going to have that so that people can actually express their views instead of just do the survey itself. Because we're finding that people not only want to submit the survey, but they kind of want to talk through their answer of the survey. And so we're trying to think through how we're going to be able to best do that with people.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, it looks like up next we have Cheryl Munson with her hand raised.
Cheryl, are you able to hit the unmute button?
There we go. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, we can hear you.
I want to comment about the barriers for new businesses to locate in the county. And what I see as a significant barrier is the lack of high-speed internet in certain portions of the county. And the lack of promise that this is going to be fixed in the near future or even within the next several years. So this is something that really will drive what gets developed where, I believe.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. That's good input. Anne, was there any questions in the chat that we might be able to address?
Okay, so we have an ongoing conversation. Peter commented on the permitted use table. Maybe it doesn't necessarily, probably related to our last group of questions.
Okay.
Did you want me to go ahead and read that out?
Yeah, if you can, that would be helpful.
Okay, so Peter commented that he is concerned about preserving the rural feel of the county, especially in the Ag RR, CR, and FR zones. That currently there's some predictability via what's a permitted use and what's not. And that it seems like the new use chart adds considerably to the permitted uses by right that could destroy the character of the area.
Okay. So that could be something, Peter, it sounds like maybe that's a larger question that maybe we could talk about following tonight's meeting. It could be a little bit of a larger discussion about how we've consolidated those uses and maybe if there's any in particular that you find that you would maybe not want to see permitted. We've actually done a study that we show that we have a lot more conditional uses than permitted than compared to the existing ordinance. But we could definitely have that conversation and continue to have that conversation offline. That would be helpful. Okay. Looks like a few more people have their hand raised. Do we want to unmute them as well? Like Randy Cassidy has his hand raised, so I'll go ahead and have him go next.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Ann. In regards to the questions on business type, the types of businesses that are in demand in the county, when we get, I can't say what number one is because we're not sure what is in high demand as far as employment opportunities. But when we get into the barriers of new businesses located in our county, a good portion of that has to do with reputational and predictability in the process. If someone comes in and says they want a business located, having already pre-existing pre-zoned areas that are near our highways and with the utilities, have we we've been able to identify where we have those intersecting pieces so that when someone says that they want to come in and put a business, we can say, okay, the process will take you 3 months or 6 months, and here's the areas we've already got designated. And that goes into question number 3, the areas that people want to develop. They want to develop the areas that are already zoned, already have ready sites that they can come in, construct what it is, and then start employing people. Those are a couple comments. Have a question. If we've put those 3 things together, roads, utilities, sewers, and then the areas where we have the slopes that can be dealt with based on what our ordinances are now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, it's a good point about maybe outlining the timeline or process a little bit clearer. We do have that drafted, but I think we can make that a little bit clearer in the ordinance, in the new ordinance. So thank you for that.
Okay, next up we have Jen Pearl and then Clark.
Hi, thank you so much. So in terms of question number 1, types of businesses that are in high demand, I think really fall into 2 categories. One is those businesses that are here that are just trying to grow and stay here. We had a recent example of a company that is trying to grow and stay here, but actually cannot find existing space in the time that is needed. So that's actually not even like talking about, you know, trying to attract someone here, but actually keep someone here. We had another example of a business last year that only needed probably about 15,000 square feet, but had certain requirements around like ceiling heights and dock doors, and could not find that here, and we could not. And it was a great industry, great fit. Also not a huge footprint, which I know is sometimes a concern for keeping, you know, rural spaces preserved and such. And so those are 2 examples of businesses that we'd even want to keep in the region that we're not able to because of the lack of available land or buildings. And so that is also an answer to number 2. What we're seeing in the long run is an opportunity for higher tech jobs. The federal U.S. CHIPS and Science Act is investing very heavily in research and development and trying to put together tech hubs in communities around the U.S. We have the Indiana Ready program, which is investing heavily in regions. We're seeing new leadership at IU, which is focusing increasingly on Indianapolis. And we've seen our industrial base change over time. We went from furniture making to manufacturing, and then manufacturing left, and then the rise of life sciences. What we're trying to do, and if we have this once in a generation opportunity, if we do this right, we can really position ourselves for future focused jobs, especially in areas like tech. So what that means in terms of land is we need to consider both land for these businesses, and we have statistics on the types of buildings and spaces that are needed that we can provide, but then also the housing for the talent to work in these industries as well. In terms of barriers for new business, I already mentioned, you know, shovel ready and turnkey land and buildings of a certain type. And then we run up against both. A lot of people say that it's difficult to do business here. We're trying to dig in with them to understand, is that a perception that it's difficult to do business, or what pieces of the process are they running into? So what we're working on, and I know we've talked with the planning department, is just mapping out what the process looks like. So that one, if businesses have a misunderstanding that, hey, actually you can navigate it this way, we can help them understand better. Or if there's a snag they're running into in the process, that would be an easy fix. We're looking at that as well. Clark on our team may have a lot more specifics on the types of land and buildings are needed and other specifics there, but I just wanted to give kind of the overall big picture of what the opportunities we're seeing in the community. I will also drop into the chat our annual report, which includes statistics on the types of projects that we're seeing coming in the door. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. And 2 things I'd like to follow up with your comments about and maybe this is better for offline, but we do have, I think you're alluding to like home-based businesses or home occupations that grow out of the realm of being able to be in a residential area. And then how do we get those people to more easily convert to commercial properties, and what's the threshold for saying from our perspective, there is a certain point in which they need to move on because it becomes less of a residential area. And then we've been allowing for retrofitting of older areas, and we're not seeing as high of an uptick of retrofitting old buildings. It seems like people are still trying to go to empty lots and build new. So I'd be curious, maybe offline, talking to you a little bit about those two topics, as well as Clark, since you guys have a lot of those statistics. But thank you.
Okay, up next is Clark.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. To kind of reinforce what Jen was saying, Jackie, the examples that she gave, those were light industrial properties. So we literally have a group right now that needs 150,000 square feet currently in the community. We're actually having to refer them to other communities right now to help them find space. So we have a lack of industrial property that's available. And if you kind of look on a broad basis across Monroe County, when you look at light industrial, and we mainly spend our time in the traded sector businesses, which are going to be like the Cooks, Catalents, advanced manufacturing, like a Tossis, and groups like that, as well as some of the IT spaces and defense, which are going to be known for some smaller spaces, smaller businesses. But one of the voids that we're really experiencing a difficult time, and this really makes it hard to retain businesses. And so we're in the process of losing one right now if we aren't able to find some space for them. And to Jen's point, we did lose a smaller one, but it was an up and coming growing business. And one of the things that we have, because we are a regional employment hub, Crane, we get a lot of opportunities, as Jen pointed out. We have $108 million of payroll from Crane that actually comes into Monroe County. And a lot of their contractors and stuff are looking for space. And so we not only look for traded sector jobs, right, direct jobs, but we also pay attention to indirect jobs and induced jobs. And by having not much space available on industrial properties, that creates a problem. So we do lose people like that. And so, which brings me to the next statement here is as we look at our property and just the availability of industrial property and being able to develop it as one of the key components of a good business retention and expansion plan to be able to do that. And rail is also one of the assets that we actually look for, because some of these manufacturers that come in need rail lines to actually be able to bring supplies and components in and out. So typically a traded sector business is not just going to do business on a local basis, they're going to do business on a national and international basis in many cases. And that's what creates a large chunk of our jobs. Over the last few years, when you look at the statistics, and this is in the report that Jen loaded online in the chat, is you'll see that a large number of our employers actually bring those jobs within our community. And I think what Jen, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but in the last 2 years, projects that the BEDC worked on contributed to over $600 million plus, and thousands and thousands of jobs over the last few years and continuing into the upcoming years. And so it's vital that we have this space available and are able to attract these companies. And if we don't have land, and to Mr. Cassidy's point, if we don't have land available and with the appropriate utilities and stuff, that makes it very difficult. And rail is one component, which brings me to one of the next questions, or one of the next statements that I have. We do see quite a bit of production-related, manufacturing-related jobs that come into our community. And some of them are very advanced manufacturing, avionics and med device. things that we're well known for. But again, if we're not able to either have the allotted property size, because some of these projects are coming in, they're not just looking for 10 or 20 acres. In 2022, we evaluated just through opportunities that we've seen over, it's right at about 92 different prospect opportunities, and the median acreage size that they needed to be able to build or to grow was over a minimum. Median size was 40 acres, 40 acres minimum, and that sometimes can be a very difficult component to find within our community unless we're really being thoughtful and planning on that. Minimum building size is what they're looking for to start, is about 160,000 square feet up to 235,000 square feet, kind of on average, kind of in between that range is what they're looking for, along with the various different utilities. And then the other thing that we're seeing as a trend across the economic development spectrum is just the timeline in order to start a project and develop it and move it into that site and that location. So we're seeing condensed timeline, and compound that with supply chains that are extended out, and then compound that with a long permitting process, development process. Sometimes it just makes it unable for those organizations to be able to move into our community or to be able to attract them. Right now, I can tell you, I'm talking with companies within our community that I have a demand right now of a facility, a warehouse, light industrial facility. They need 200,000 square feet. I've got another manufacturer who needs over 40,000 square feet within now and the next 24 months. As I'd said earlier, we have a manufacturer right now that's about 150,000 square feet they're going to lose. So if you look at that right there alone, that's almost 400,000 square feet of space that we really need, that we don't have from an availability standpoint. So those are some of the things from looking at it from a beefy, bulky sort of perspective. Which brings me to the next question: is there's some property between off Angelina Lane and Loesch Road and West Vernal Pike. I put their addresses in there. Right now, it looks like it's ag. There may be some topographical features there and maybe some floodway in there, but there's a rail line coming through there. You need a little bit of land if you want to add or attract or add rail spurs into that community. And I would strongly encourage the look or evaluation of maybe offering that as a potential light industrial space. And then if I kind of go up the road a little bit and get up to the Ellettsville area, on the west side of Ellettsville, there's some property out there. You guys may remember Keehee used to be off Daniels Way. They built almost a 380,000 square foot facility just inside the city limit or town limits of Ellettsville. There's two parcels directly south of that would be great potential industrial. There is some flood or some waterways there that could be mitigated, but there's also other property around that area that I think would really be good for that western development there on 46 Highway out there. If you go straight down Hart Straight Road, there's some hilly terrain that would certainly be needed to remain residential, and the ag, I certainly agree with that. But I'd love to have maybe another look at that western side of it, of Ellettsville. And Ellettsville has put together a plan called Envision Ellettsville that really has an emphasis on that area on the west side. You also have Smithville out there that is interested in doing some potential commercial development and some other opportunities out there. And we've been having great conversations with Owen County and some of the other utilities that provide the western side of Monroe County there too. So kind of in a general nutshell, those are some of my initial observations here that I think we could maybe reconsider or reevaluate. Thank you for your.
Thank you, Clark. And yeah, if you can connect me, I was hoping to connect with somebody about the Envision Ellettsville. I think that was something that our Plan Commission recommended. We also connect with people from that group. So I'd be happy to have a contact there if you have someone, and we can look further at that. So, thank you.
You bet.
All right. So we are at time here, and it looks like we've pretty much answered most of the chat. I do see maybe some conversation here about possibly back and forth about what happened to the rural community plans. We are still hoping that those are being incorporated with specifically looking at that rural community 1 zoning district, allowing that flexibility. So we are still hoping that that is being utilized. Picking and choosing, sorry, there's a lot in the chat. One of the things that I think maybe this Richard Martin might be getting to, and something I noted is I really like the idea of looking at the zoning along rail lines and also focusing on vacancy rates within some of our business and industrial areas, because we do have that data to sort of guide us on, is it 50% vacant? Is it 99% occupied? That will also tell us maybe that we need to keep looking for more areas that could be zoned industrially or business wise. So I appreciate those comments. So if everyone wouldn't mind, before you take off, if you could leave your name and contact information if you're comfortable with it. We are going to be just tracking who is all able to join us this evening. If you could just slip that into the chat. And also, if you have any follow-up questions, indicate that in the chat with your email. We'll be able to get back to you. And we do really appreciate your time. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. And hopefully this was helpful. And like I said, we'll go ahead and post this recording as well as the other recordings on our CDO website following tonight's meeting. And any feedback that you have for tonight, if you'd like to see different iterations of this, if this was helpful, please reach out. We like to hear from you and continue on with our discussion and help us to get to a point of adopting a new CDO. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
A quick note, we've had a great, very lovely, lively chat. So just for everybody's reference, we will be able to access everybody's notes in the chat, and we will be saving that along with the recording. We might not necessarily post it, but we will incorporate that into our notes that we discussed tonight.
Yes, good point. Thank you, Anne. Appreciate it. All right. Well, if you post in the chat and you don't have any further questions, you're welcome to sign off, and we will be getting in touch with you if you've left a note in there for us to get in touch with you, and appreciate your feedback. So thank you, everyone.